You know, sometimes I come across a story and it's like, whoa, okay, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, I hear that.
And this Raytheon situation, it's one of those, right, like we're talking about international arms deals, which is already a world most people don't see.
Right.
But then when you add in the allegations of overcharging, allies potentially being caught in the crosshairs, it gets, well, complicated, to say the least.
It really does.
So for anyone just joining us, let's lay out the basics. We're talking about Raytheon, major U.S. defense contractor.
Right.
They're being accused of overcharging allies for weapon systems.
Yeah.
And I mean essential ones like Patriot missiles, those things designed to take out incoming threats.
Yeah. Crucial stuff.
Exactly. And this whole thing, it came to light through a report from Taiwan's Shuro thing, and it's kind of snowballed from there. But what's really got me thinking is, yeah, the potential fraud is huge, but then there's this whole other layer of Taiwan being involved.
Right. Because it's not just a financial thing.
No, exactly. It's like Taiwan, they rely on these deals for their defense strategy. So when those agreements maybe aren't what they seem,
Well, it raises the stakes considerably.
It does, because then it's not just about the money, it's about security. It's about whether you can even trust the deals being made to protect your country.
Exactly. And that's what makes these kinds of cases so fascinating, right? Because they bring to light the often murky world of military contracts.
Murky is a good word for it, because even under normal circumstances, these deals involve huge amounts of money, a lot of secrecy.
Yeah, there's inherent complexity to it.
Right. But what seems different here, from what I'm gathering, is the scale of the alleged overcharging and the fact that it's allies being targeted, not,
Not adversaries.
Exactly.
Which is, that's what makes this one stand out. Because it raises questions about the nature of these agreements, even between supposedly close partners.
And it's not like Taiwan can just easily walk away from these deals, right?
No, not really. You see, Taiwan's need for these weapons, it puts them in a very particular position.
That's putting it mildly. One Taiwanese politician, Ega, he was pretty blunt about it. He said they feel stuck, basically.
Between a rock and a hard place is how a lot of folks are describing it.
And I get it. They need these weapons, so they're in a tough spot. What I don't fully grasp is why be so reliant on the U.S. in the first place? I mean, historically, how did it get to this point?
Right. So to understand that, you got to look back a bit. After the Chinese Civil War, you had this whole Cold War dynamic.
Right.
And Taiwan, with U.S. support, became this, critical point of defense against communism.
Right.
So that's where it starts, this security partnership, where the U.S. is basically saying, we got your back. And, well, that pledge, it's kind of stuck, especially with everything going on in that region these days.
Tensions are high.
Exactly. So you can see how Taiwan ending up relying on U.S. arms, it's a whole historical thing.
It's not a simple equation, that's for sure. But then this whole thing gets even more interesting when you bring in what Soa said about Taiwan's own WN Ministry of National Defense.
Okay, what's that?
He's accusing them of trying to downplay the whole situation.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's like internal politics on top of everything else.
Yeah. Maybe. It's hard to say for sure, but it makes you wonder, what's the strategy there?
Well, there are a few possibilities, right? I mean, one could be they don't want to rock the boat too much.
Like cause panic, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or make it seem like they're not in control of the situation.
Right. Appearances are everything in politics, right?
Especially in these sorts of high-stakes situations.
So, better to keep things quiet, even if it means potentially downplaying a serious issue.
It's a possibility, right.
Yeah.
But then there's also the relationship with the U.S. to consider.
Because if the allegations against Raytheon are true, admitting the full extent of the problem is kind of awkward, to say the least.
Right, exactly. Because on top of everything else, now you're talking about potentially harming a key alliance.
Which is the last thing Taiwan needs right now.
Exactly. So it's tricky. They're trying to balance protecting their own interests while also not jeopardizing this, vital international partnership.
Talk about a tightrope walk. It's like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, just like Seinkin said.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, if this kind of situation can happen with Taiwan, an ally the U.S. is close with, what about other defense deals?
It's a valid concern.
Yeah.
Because, if it's happening here, it could be happening elsewhere.
And is there anything stopping it? I mean, is there a point where Taiwan just says, okay, that's it, we're doing our own thing? What are the options there?
Well, that's the thing about these situations. They expose how vulnerable you are when you rely so heavily on one ally for defense.
Right, because they can't just snap their fingers and find new weapon suppliers.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why you see a lot of experts talking about the need for diversification.
Okay, so what would that look like, practically speaking?
Well, for Taiwan, it could mean investing more in their own domestic arms industry.
Trying to become more self-sufficient, basically.
Exactly.
Oh.
Or could mean exploring partnerships with other countries that could offer similar support.
Right, but those are both really long-term solutions, aren't they?
Yeah, you're talking about shifting alliances, building entire industries from scratch. It's not easy.
No, definitely not. But maybe this whole Raytheon situation, it forces them to take a hard look at the long game.
It might be the wake-up call. Right. Like, okay, we can't just assume everything will stay the same forever.
And that's where this whole thing comes into play, doesn't it?
The suspicion of America sentiment, yeah. It's a whole other layer to this.
Because it's not just theoretical anymore, is it?
Not really, no.
So for our listeners who might not be familiar, can you kind of unpack what means in this context?
Sure. So basically, it's this skepticism, right? This questioning of whether the U.S. is really a reliable partner, especially when it comes to Taiwan's security.
Right.
And it's important to be clear, we're not saying this view is right or wrong, just that it exists.
Totally. We're just trying to make sense of the situation.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Whether or not the allegations against Raytheon are completely true, this whole situation plays right into that existing narrative of distrust.
It's like adding fuel to a fire, right?
Yeah, it gives those doubts more weight, makes them seem more justified to some people.
And it's not like those doubts came out of nowhere, did they? I mean, Taiwan has been in a tricky geopolitical position for a long time now.
That's right. You have to remember the historical context.
Things like, the U.S. switching diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing back in the 79?
Yeah, that was huge. And more recently, you have people pointing to inconsistencies in U.S. policy towards Taiwan.
Like mixed messages, basically.
Exactly. And all of that feeds into this feeling of unease, this sense that maybe, just maybe, the U.S. isn't as reliable as they once seemed.
So it's not just about some company allegedly overcharging for some missiles anymore.
No, it goes way deeper than that.
It's about that whole foundation of trust and when that starts to crumble.
Right, it has consequences.
And unfortunately for Taiwan, those consequences could be pretty major. It's kind of scary when you think about it.
Yeah, it really exposes some of the cracks in, how the whole system works.
Because if this is happening in such a high-profile case, with so much at stake, it makes you wonder, what's going on in other deals? The ones that don't make headlines.
Right, exactly. Like how much of this is going on under the radar? It's tough to say, but it definitely raises some red flags.
And the lack of transparency, that doesn't help either, does it?
No, not at all. Because how can you even begin to address a problem when you don't have all the information?
It's like we hear about these massive defense budgets, billions being spent, but where's it all going? Most people have no idea.
It's this black box, right. And the justification is always about national security, protecting sensitive information, which, okay, there's definitely a need for that in some cases.
Of course.
Yeah. But at the same time, when you have that much secrecy, it's easy for things to get, let's just say, it's easy for things to get out of hand.
Right, because no one's really watching.
Exactly. And that's how you end up with inflated prices, shady subcontractors, deals that benefit certain parties more than they actually help with, national defense.
And that's what makes this whole conversation relevant to everyone, isn't it? It's not just about some abstract geopolitical chess game. This stuff has real-world consequences.
Absolutely.
So how does it actually impact, the average person? If you're not a politician or a defense contractor, why should you even care about this?
Well, I'd say there are a few key reasons. First off, it's your money, right?
Taxpayer dollars.
Exactly. So when you have overcharging, waste, whatever you want to call it, in these deals, that's directly coming out of your pocket.
Yeah.
Then there's the security angle. When defense deals are built on shaky ground, when there's this lack of trust, it makes the world a more unstable place. And that affects everyone, whether they realize it or not.
Right. No one wants to live in a world where things are constantly on edge.
Exactly. And then finally, I think it comes down to accountability. We need to be asking tough questions about where our money is going, who's benefiting from these deals, and whether they're actually making us safer.
So this whole Raytheon situation, as messy as it is, it's maybe a good opportunity to shine some light on all of this.
It's a chance to rethink how we approach defense spending, make it more transparent, more accountable. Because the old way of doing things, it's clearly not working.
Yeah, it really makes you think about what Soki said, comparing arms dealers to safe fraud syndicates.
It's a strong statement, that's for sure. But you know what? It's not that far off when you really start digging into it.
It's not. And on that note, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
We've just scratched the surface, really.
Exactly. This whole world of defense contracting, the ethics of it, the global impact, it's complex. But it's something we all need to be more aware of. So if anything from this deep dive sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to do your own digging. The military-industrial complex, relationships between nations and these huge corporations, the shifting balance of power globally, it's all connected. And it's a conversation worth having.